Hello students, good morning and welcome to this history class. Our topic for today is the road to independence and attainment of independence. So this class is for SS2 students, but I do urge the SS3 students to also join the lesson so that it will serve as a form of revision for them. Our objective for this lesson will be as follows. The students should be able to discuss the attitude of the international environment or international community towards colonialism, explain the divide and rule policies of the British, and number three, relate the events that led to the attainment of independence in Nigeria. Let's quickly look at the attitude of the international environment or international community towards colonialism. We all know that from 1945 to 1960, the worldview about colonialism had completely changed from what it used to be or from what it was before the First and the Second World Wars. So there was a lot of international pressure coming from the newly emerged world powers, that is the USA, United States of America, and the USSR, that is the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics. So they demanded that all territories under colonial rule should be granted independence. Well, after the First and the Second World War, new world powers emerged. America and the USSR, who joined the Allied forces to fight the Germans and the rest in the First and Second World War, eventually emerged as new world powers, and their views about colonialism was different from what it used to be. So they urged the colonial powers to grant independence to all territories under colonial rule. That was clearly stated in the Atlantic Charter, where these two leaders, we have Franklin Roosevelt of America and Winston Churchill of Britain, talked about the fact that every nation or every people were free to choose the form of government under which they would like to live. So the change of leadership in Britain also had an effect on Nigeria getting her independence. With Winston Churchill as Prime Minister, he eloquently spoke against colonialism with his American counterpart Franklin Roosevelt. So they stated in the Atlantic Charter that every nation had the right to choose the form of government under which they would like to live. So this statement included Nigeria, because Nigeria was under colonial rule at that point in time. The divide and rule policy of the British. The British rule of Nigeria from 1900 to 1960. During the British rule of Nigeria from 1900 to 1960, different regions were frequently reclassified or administratively reclassified for administrative purpose. Why were they doing that? Because they wanted to have a strong grip over the country. They wanted to have total control over the administration of the country. So the conflict between the Igbo and the Hausa, for example, made it easier for the British to consolidate their power in the region. Now, looking back, we know about the policy of indirect rule, which clearly succeeded in the northern part of the country, probably because there was a system on ground that supported, or that this system could easily fit into. Meanwhile, in the west, it succeeded partially, but in the east it did not work because there was no centralized form of government there. So the policy of divide and rule was a very important strategy that the British used in most of their colonies to have firm control over these territories. Now let's quickly look at the events leading to the attainment of independence in Nigeria. So independence means a political freedom from control by government of another country, or the freedom and ability to make your own decisions in life. So that was what Nigeria was looking for at this point in time, independence. So let's start with the constitutions. One of the most important issues for nationalists was the form of constitution to adopt for the country. So The Richards Constitution that came up in 1944 had proposed the establishment of legislative councils for the country on the basis of universal franchise, and regional councils were established. The regional councils were to have no legislative power. In addition to the regional council in the north, there was a House of Chiefs. The constitution came into effect on 1st January 1947. Now we see a constitution that brought legislative council based on universal franchise, but then this council did not have any legislative power. So why were they then called legislative council? That is to tell you that they were just there as figurehead or some sort of decorated legislator without any form of power. And the fact that they also gave the North the House of Chiefs to add to this legislative assembly was some sort of discrimination against other parts of the country where they also had chiefs but were not given House of Chiefs. So the constitution was opposed by the nationalists for three main reasons that we are going to look at below. So why the nationalists opposed the Richards Constitution? They rejected it because it was drawn up without reference to the people of Nigeria. Now, you do not put up a constitution that is going to rule over a people without making reference to those people, or without consulting them, or without including them in the draft of that constitution. Secondly, they saw elements of indirect rule in the constitution. For example, reviving the regional councils, which were denied any legislative power. So these regional councils, like we earlier said, did not have any form of legislative power. That means they were virtually useless. So there was no need having a legislative council without legislative powers. The nationalists saw no wisdom in treating the North differently by giving it a House of Chiefs in addition to the regional council. So giving the North the House of Chiefs sound like other regions did not have chiefs or what. Other regions also had chiefs. They also had a traditional system of government. So that was giving preference to the North and also treating the other regions differently. So they saw no wisdom in that. By giving the North the House of Chiefs meant that they had special attention for the North. So they quickly stood against this constitution, which was eventually left out. Now, another constitution came up in 1951, that is the Macpherson Constitution of 1951. This constitution, which came into effect in January 1951, moved towards federalism or a federation as a solution to Nigeria's constitutional problems. The reason being that Nigeria was a country with people of different cultures, languages, religions, and traditions. So to rule them as one unit will mean imposing the culture of the majority over the minority group. So it was very necessary to adopt a federation of a federal system of government so that there will be no clear domination of the majority over the minority in the country, as well as to manage the different cultural diversity, even though they were going to remain as one country, but the federal system was going to be the best to solve this constitutional problem. The Littleton Constitution of 1954. In 1954, a federal constitution, sometimes called the Littleton Constitution, was agreed upon. It made provision for three regions. We have the Western region, or the West, the Eastern region as the East, and the North. So each of these regions was to have a government and a legislative assembly made up of a House of Chiefs and a House of Assembly, with each one having legislative powers. Each regional government was headed by a premier, or that's a prime minister. So that you see that there was a sort of improvement on this constitution, unlike the previous one. So in this case, every other region had a House of Chiefs, unlike in the Richards Constitution, where they only considered the North. So by this system, Regional governments were to be responsible for the internal affairs of the region. This was to include education, health, industry, and so on. The British government was to continue to have control over foreign affairs, defense, security, finance and banking, and the armed forces. So in the same year, both the East and the West agreed to obtain self-government. Constitutional Conference. The Constitutional Conference is held in London, considered issues of revenue allocation, state creation in Nigeria, and the status of Lagos and the boundary adjustment. So all these were supposed to be put into consideration before the country became independent. There was going to there was need to draw up the way funds will be allocated to various states, to draw up the way state will be created, as well as decide on the status of Lagos, because we know from the time Nigeria was colonized, Lagos always had a special status. So there was need to define the status of Lagos and also to work on boundary adjustment at that point in time. So we talked about disagreements and bitterness among the nationalists. Once the Nigerian nationalists had agreed on the need for independence, they began to disagree among themselves on almost every local issue. There was much bitterness and rivalry, and a general lack of cooperation and trust among the leaders. Despite all this, Britain cooperated and gave Nigeria independence on a platter of gold. Why do we say they gave Nigeria independence on a platter of gold? Unlike in Ghana, Kenya, and Zimbabwe, there was no form of mass arrest and military confrontation before independence in Nigeria. So we see that Nigeria got independence without even fighting for it. Some people claim that they fought for independence. There was no form of mass arrest and armed confrontation like in other African countries. So that is why we always say Nigeria was given independence on a platter of gold. Delay from the north. The northern region was also granted self-government. However, the region had problems of manpower, as they had few qualified people to take up important administrative positions. So they were not willing to employ the southerners. They felt that the southerners were proud of their Western education and so on, and they claimed that they too were proud of their Eastern education and their Eastern culture. So they were not willing to employ the southerners. They decided to send some of their promising young northerners for training abroad, after which they came back to take up responsible administrative positions in the north and the country. Let's look at 1st October 1960, independence at last. So on the 1st of October 1960, the government of Nigeria was returned by Britain to Nigerians. This means that from that date, Nigeria was free to conduct her foreign affairs. She was also responsible from that date on for her defense and internal security. In summary, we were able to discuss the following in today's lesson. We talked about the attitude of the international environment or community towards colonialism, where we said the attitude of the international community had changed. They were no longer in support of colonialism. Therefore, they urged every colonial power to grant independence to their colonial territories. The British politics of divide and rule that was perpetrated in Nigeria, in order to allow them to have a firm grip of the country's politics and other economic aspects. And we also talked about the events that led to attainment of independence in Nigeria, ranging from constitutional issues, from disagreement among the nationalists, also the divide and rule policies, and so on. So, in a nutshell, these are some of the things that we discussed. So, this is going to be your assignment for this lesson. So, this assignment is against our next class. So, you're going to answer these questions and forward them to me. what system of government was handed over to Nigeria at independence? Number 2, explain the nature of the political parties in the First Republic. And 3, state some of the challenges of democratic governance in the First Republic in Nigeria. So I expect you to answer these questions and forward them to my page as soon as you finish this lesson. That is before our next lesson. I should be able to have your assignments. Thank you very much. I hope you're staying home and you are studying and not only watching television and playing around or chatting on WhatsApp and Facebook. So you better put yourself together and remember that education continues with or without COVID-19.